and I want to grant permission to Westford Media Center to live stream and videotape the meeting. Is there anybody else who wants to record the meeting? By the way, I'm not going to read the full notice, but in compliance with our authorization from the governor and the legislature, we are conducting this meeting by Zoom instead of in person. Let me think here. Do I see all the remote participants? I saw Chairman LeBlanc at one point in time. And I'm going to go over the process of how we, with our attendees tonight. I just saw Alex joined. We'll welcome others as they join. Victoria, we do the Pledge of Allegiance, then we do the roll call. Is that the way we're going to do this?
Yes.
Okay, so let's stand and do our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let me make, I guess you better do the roll call. Then I have a couple of announcements I want to make. So let's go ahead. I got to get my Zoom skills back in place here. So Victoria, will you do the roll call, please?
Okay. Bill Bruce.
Here.
John Kerry.
Here.
I'm just letting Jim in.
Okay, welcome, Jim.
Jim Ferrero.
Jim, we're doing the roll call, so.
He's just coming on now.
Okay.
All right, I'm here.
Good.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Jim.
Seth Fredrickson.
I'm here.
Mike Gay.
Present.
George Hertz.
Here.
Caitlin Jersak. George Laham.
Here.
George Marone.
Here.
Christina Pedjewicz.
Here.
Chris Peretta.
Here.
Sean Weller.
Here.
And Alex Yell.
Here.
Okay.
Okay. Let me start off. I want to share my deepest sympathy and my thoughts and prayers with Angela Hughes. She's dealing with a family loss, and I just want to extend our thoughts and prayers to her. That's why she's not with us tonight. Procedurally, the way we're going to do things tonight is the Chairman LeBlanc, when she joins us to go over the special town meeting, which I'm going to ask Chris Pareda to sort of handle as vice chair, she will join us a participant. When she is done, she will leave and basically go into an observer status. So she'll be a panelist, and then she will move to a observer status. And then when Select Board Member Gotti joins, he will come as a panelist when we get into his update on the long-range financial planning group. So I guess I want to welcome all of you to our Zoom meeting tonight. We will be doing the December meeting in person, when we actually have to vote on the special town meeting warrant articles. And with that, let me turn it over to Mr. Pareda. Chris, will you basically take charge of dealing with the special town meeting warrant articles?
Sure. Thanks, George. So as you know, the select board has decided to call a special town meeting in January of 2024. The warrant was opened and closed on the same day in October. I forget which day in October. Present now are the select board chair, Marianne LeBlanc Cummings, to present the articles that will be coming up before that special town meeting.
So Chairman LeBlanc, let me just welcome you too, okay?
Thank you so much, Chris and George. And I also want to express my sympathy to Angela and her family. Good evening, everyone. Good to see all of you. So we are here tonight to present the articles for the special town meeting, which has been scheduled for January 17th with a backup weather date of January 18th. The special meeting is primarily to request that the town allocate funds for the design and bid documents for the construction of a new Fire Station 1 at its existing location. We expect to vote on final language on these articles at our meeting on December 4th, and we'll be back to you on December 6th. So I think someone can put up the PowerPoint. If someone could do that, I'd appreciate it, showing the articles. Chris, is there somebody who can put that up?
I'm working on that right now. Oh, there we go. Thank you,
Fabulous.
Victoria.
Thank you, Victoria. Fabulous. Great. So moving on to the next slide, if you would please. Fabulous. Thank you. So this is the first article, the main article as to fire station design and bid documents. At the outset, I should say this is not a request for funds that will increase residents' tax bills. We are looking to pay for this from free cash and ARPA funds. So we have voted. The total for the design and bid documents is $3.5 million. We have voted to allocate $1.4 million in ARPA funds, contingent upon town meeting voting to allocate $2.1 million from free cash. And again, this is for construction and bid documents for a new Fire Station 1 at the existing location, and also to renovate temporary quarters, swing space, if you will, for the fire station at the 90 Deerfield Ave address, the American Legion. So that this is the primary article for the special town meeting. We can move to the next slide, please.
Mary, excuse me, Madam Chair, can I just say one thing?
Please.
Yes, just to clarify, so to the FinCom and those watching, the $3.5 million is for design bid. So again, as Marianne said, we're not, the board is not seeking any additional funding at this time. So it's for the design bid, and the idea would be to come back to a future town meeting and then ask town meeting for construction funding for this project, just to be clear.
Thank you. That was Chris Coleman, and thank you, Chris, for making that clear. Go ahead, Marianne.
Thank you so much. So the second article is a debt housekeeping article where we are asking the town to vote to abandon the purchase of a fire multi-purpose vehicle for which $400,000 was authorized to be borrowed at the annual town meeting in 2021, and then to transfer those funds into another approved capital project, as has been advised by bond counsel. The reason being that the vehicle can no longer be procured. And then thirdly, Article 3 on the next slide is simply a placeholder. At this time, I do not see anything on the horizon with respect to this article, but were there to be some urgent matter, we have a placeholder for that, but I do not see anything on the horizon. So as I said, we'll have final language to present to you at a later meeting, and I'm happy to take any questions folks may have at this point.
Chairman LeBlanc, thank you. First of all, let me welcome Chris Coleman to our meeting, and let's open it up to, I see hands raised. The first one I see is Christina.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm getting the nuance here, but design bid, is that just to design the building and none of that funding goes towards construction?
That's right. That's right. And the bid documents.
And then what was it, ARPA funding? Is that money that's just coming from the federal government, the state government?
The American Rescue Plan Act. Yes, those are funds, which part of which the select board has already allocated. And these are part of the remaining funds that we have and that we need to spend or we lose them.
Okay, just another quick question. I have a little bit of sticker shock for the design at 3.5 million. Is that typical?
That is typical. I mean, I can't quote what we've paid on design for other projects, but certainly in the ballpark. I bet George could probably cite chapter and verse on that.
I probably can't, but it is potentially a $40+ million project. So I don't really have the comparative data, Marianne, to be honest with you. So
Thank you, sorry.
maybe we can get the information on what we spent for design build on the school, which might give us a reference point. Okay. Although I don't know if that was design bid. We'll have to find out. Mr. Ferrara, question?
Thank you. Just following up on Christina's question. For the design bid, is that numbers you've been talking to potential contractors about already, or is that just a guesstimate going forward?
That is the figure that we received from our consultant, Doran Whittier.
Okay. And regarding the American Rescue Plan funds, how much did the town of Westwood receive and how much does it have left? I know some was given to the school department for the Hanlon School.
Right. I do believe that I think Steph might be covering that tonight. I'm looking to see if I have that information handy for you, Jim.
Madam Chair, I can help you with that if you like.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yes, so we received a little over $4.8 million in total. And right now, after the select board's vote, contingent upon town meeting passage of the design bid project, we will have approximately $89,000 remaining.
And I presume that's going to show up in the spring, in a warrant article in the spring for final spending, or is that to be saved for something else?
There are a few other projects that we've been talking about internally that we have yet to present to the board. The first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that we had sufficient, as much funding as possible for the design bid. So we have $89,000 that we will be discussing with the board for a future project. And what we've been trying to do is use the funding for one-time expenses.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Good. I see George.
Yeah. How are you, Marianne? Thank you very
Hi,
much.
George.
The planning phase is being funded from free cash, but ultimately, if it moves forward with a new building, that most likely will be funded, if you had a guess, by a 2.5 override, or is that the long-term
Exclusion.
game? Yeah. I just didn't know what the long-term game plan there was.
Yes. And actually, Stephanie will be giving a discussion about debt tonight. So I think that will help folks to sort of understand the overall context. But yes, you're correct.
That is always an exciting conversation. Thank you.
Chris Parada, I think you were next. Then I see Mike Gay afterwards. So Chris.
Yeah, the slide on Article 1 has the $2.1 million figure, but the total amount is 3.5 million. Is that just because all we have to spend right now is 2.1? We've already received the other 1.4.
The board voted to allocate 1.4 million in ARPA funds,
Okay,
contingent upon town meeting voting to spend the 2.1 to bring us to the 3.5.
okay, all right. So and on Article 2, Do you have any idea what the $400,000 might be used for?
Stephanie is working with bond counsel on that now. And I understand that bond counsel has advised that it should be applied to another approved capital project. So they are working on that now as we speak.
Madam Chair, I can expand on that a little
Thank
bit
you.
if you'd like.
Please.
Go ahead, Chris.
So one of the things that we're learning from bond counsel is in order to apply, we have to apply to a project that is for borrowing that we have yet to go out to for long-term borrowing. So we are limited on the projects that we could apply this to. And again, we're continuing to, as Marianne said, we're continuing to work with bond counsel. We'll have that information for the select board at the December 4th meeting.
Chris, does it have to be a previously approved?
In this particular case, it does, because we have to, the money was previously borrowed. So what we need to do is we need to make sure we apply that to a project that already has expenses incurred. But again, we have not gone out to long-term borrowing yet.
And previously approved by town meeting, correct?
Correct, 100%, yes.
Good.
All right, so I mean, ideally, in my mind, it would be something that is also related to the fire department. But I understand the constraints that you're under and look forward to seeing the final wording of the article and the final project that you've picked. So,
and just to be clear, Chris, it legally it does not have to tie to a fire department, but I understand what you're saying.
yeah, I get it, Chris.
Okay.
Anyway, all right, that's all I have. Thanks.
Mike Gay, and then I'll get, after Mike, we'll go to Seth and Sean. Mike?
Yes, hello, Marianne. Hi, Chris.
How are you?
Following up actually on Chris Pareda's questions, I've got a two-parter on Article 2. The first is, can you expand on what happened on the inability to procure?
So as I understand it, Mike, what happened was when the chief was getting information on the cost for this multi-purpose vehicle, we had a vendor that he was speaking with. And I don't know if you remember this, but there was 2 years in effort that the chief had trying to get this project funded. In the second year, what we found out through the vendor was they couldn't meet the national fire standards for this multi-purpose vehicle or the swap body. There's a swap body that is used in public works, which we have one. Other communities have them as well. But this would have to be built to a certain standard, and the manufacturer said that they could no longer do that.
And this may be the follow-up. Thank you, Chris. The follow-up to that is, this may be a chief question, but is there any, implied impact on the services that the fire department can provide to the Westwood citizens with the loss of this vehicle for the future planning?
From a timing standpoint, I'm not going to say that there's a loss. I know that the chief has put in a request in this year's upcoming annual town meeting capital request for a vehicle that this was going to be used for, because this was a multi-purpose vehicle that we had the opportunity to swap out different bodies to use it in a multiple of fashions. So we will be putting forth a request, or the chief has put forth a request for a capital project.
Thank you.
I believe it's a brush truck, to be specific.
Thank you. Seth?
Yeah, thanks. And this, maybe I'm not reading this right, but I want to go deeper on the fire station design question. For the FinCom presentation given to us actually today, on page 14 for the long-term debt, it shows the amount initially issued for the Islington fire station design was $850K, and the construction cost was $8.65 million. Is that accurate? And if so, what's driving the increase from what we did 6 years ago to today?
Well, I think in part it's a larger station, and as you know, there's been quite a bit of inflation as well since we built the Islington station. So I think with those factors and all that's needed, and keep in mind that we also have to account for the swing space as well, which is a substantial part of this. Chris, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Marianne, I think you said everything. I just want to emphasize that this proposal, we're actually going to get 2 buildings out of it. And what I mean by that is, the idea would be if we were fast forwarding and the town approved all this, we would have a renovated American Legion building that would be used initially for temporary quarters for the fire department, while the construction would be happening to Station 1. When Station 1 would be completed, they would move out. We would now have an accessible meeting space and accessible building that we could use. So again, we're getting 2 for 1 out of this.
We're not getting 2 for 1 if we're going, I heard, I know it's an unofficial number, but I heard 40 million floated out, which is, I don't know, 5x, 4x times what we had previously. And totally get, there's extra hurdles being happening here, but the article is not framed that we're getting 2 buildings out of this. And it'd be interesting to see the numbers of like how, like, is the Main Street fire station 3 times larger than the Islington station? Like, can we get some of that information? Because what
You can certainly get some of that information
was
for
a
you.
new fact that we're actually building 2 buildings with this.
Well, just to be clear, we're not building 2 buildings. We're renovating 1, and that's actually in the draft article that you have that was presented. That's 90 Deerfield. So that's what we're referring to as the American Legion. So that is in the article.
Yep.
So we are renovating or reconstructing that building. We're not building it new, but we would be looking to build Station 1 new if the project were to move forward.
I guess, Chris, the one question I would add to that is, what is the basis for the design build number? Was that a bid we did and that's what the quote came in as? I guess that's the other part of the question.
I'm sorry, George, my
What
technology was, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so the design build number we got, which is the combination of the ARPA and the free cash funds, is that result from a bid? How did we come up with that number, I guess is my question.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so that came through our feasibility study.
Right.
The feasibility study that the select board authorized for us to do on Fire Station 1, that was done by Dorm Whittier. And that was part of the task that they were asked to provide the board. And they provided that estimate of 3.5 million.
Okay, but who does the design build?
Design bid would be, we would have to procure that. So we would go out.
All right, so that's their estimate, and we still have to go out and procure it. Okay, all right. Let me go to Sean. You were next, I think, and then we'll go to Jim.
But and George, you were asking some of my questions here too. So stepping back for a second, and I think just to help all of us here as well as those who may be attending and watching from around the town. What were some of the reasons behind this and why now? I'm wondering if you can give us a bit of the history of the fire station project and why the need is urgent at this moment.
You know, the need has been there, Sean, since frankly, well before I served on FinCom and while I did serve on FinCom. The fire station, and you will certainly hear much more about this in the weeks to come, but it is undersized. It is unsafe in a number of ways, and it is simply not suitable to get the job done. And it truly is an urgent public safety issue. That we have a safe building for our firefighters to work from, one that is accessible for residents. And it is not that. And we can provide you with, all of the documentation. We had, as Chris said, the feasibility study, which showed us all of the deficiencies, the many deficiencies, and why we need to build a station. The station hasn't been touched, by the way, since the 70s. I mean, they've put a few Band-Aids on it, but it is in very precarious condition. And it is a matter of urgency, which is why we called for a special town meeting so that we can hopefully get this done as soon as possible.
Excuse me, George. We also have a member of the feasibility team from Dorm Whittier as an attendee. If you would authorize him to come in, his name is Chip. He might be able to also expand on some of the responses that we've provided.
That's fine. If you'd like to make a couple of comments, that's okay.
Okay.
And thank you, Marianne. That was
So if
helpful.
someone can
You
move him
answered.
from attendee to a panelist, that would be appreciated.
I think, okay, Sean, do you want to hear from the, folks?
I would like to as well. I did have a couple of questions about
Okay.
how we got to that 3.5 million number and what the process for the feasibility study looked like.
Okay. Victoria, can you let him in?
He's there, George.
All right. Sean, you want to state your questions again?
Yeah, so Marianne, I think that was helpful and you covered some of this, and I welcome our new guest to speak to that as well. But I would also ask, how do we get to that 3.5 million number in the feasibility study? Maybe you can give us a sense of the overview. Of that process? Does it involve some benchmarking against other towns that are in similar situations and doing similar builds around this time? Appreciate any info on that front.
Yeah, I think, where we have Chip, if you could unmute and join us, I think it would be great if we could hear from you on that question.
Also, Sean, just to let you know, and let me just double check, but I believe the feasibility report is on the town's website. So the full report is available for all members of the public to review that. And I'll double check. I don't know if Chip's having a challenge with some technology, but we have on the homepage, we have fire department studies. And included in that, we do have the final draft report from October of 23.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So if Chip can't join us, maybe we can get some follow-up. The one thing I'm here, the question I think Seth had, Sean had, is what is the basis of the 3.5 million? Okay, and then maybe we can get that. Are there any other, Sean, any other questions you want to ask on that?
My last one, which this might actually relate a little more to the conversation that Stephanie and potentially Rob may be joining us for, which would be, are there considerations about what we're trading off here? And again, that may be part of the longer term considerations and financial planning.
Trade-off, you mean what else we're not able to do?
What other, can we situate this in the context of other potentially large projects?
I think under Rob Gotti, that's frankly what his committee's been focusing on. So we can raise that question then. Okay.
No, thank you, everyone. I'm good with my questions for now.
All right, thank you. Jim.
Yeah, thank you again. Moving on to question number 2. So you want to abandon the purchase or the funding. Is this going to be something to be named later, or does whatever we substitute the bond funding for, is that to go back to town meeting approval?
So the article is written to abandon that vote, and then we're going to as part of the article, we'll be reallocating that funding to an existing project that's already been authorized for borrowing, but we have not gone out for long-term borrowing yet.
So what projects are out there that we haven't funded yet?
But long-term borrowing, we haven't funded the $900,000 for Canton Street, the cemetery expansion. We have a ladder truck as an example of 3 of them.
Okay, they've been approved but not funded. Okay.
Yeah, approved but not long-term borrowed. I just want to be clear on that.
That goes to my comment, Chris, that and my preference would be have this to go to the ladder truck rather than anything else.
But it also, Chris, just to let you know, it also goes by timing. So the ladder truck does have a lead time, a significant lead time. So that's one of the questions that we have been discussing with bond counsel. So I hear you that you wanted to go to another fire expense, and we will certainly do our best to do that. But we're also going to make sure we have to follow the law to make sure that we can allocate those funds to a project in a timely manner.
Got it.
Then what
Jim,
happens? What happens to the funding for those projects?
So that
So-
authorization would be, we would go out to borrow for $400,000 or less than whichever project that it's going to be applied to. It doesn't
So-
add money to any existing project. It just would reduce the amount of money that we would have to go out to borrow for.
Okay, so you don't have to abandon that one, you can automatically reduce it,
Correct.
okay?
I could, before I see that, let me go to George Maroon, and then I see that Chip has joined us. So if Sean wants to ask the question to Chip, we might as well do it now. But let me go to George Maroon.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to follow up on the discussion on the fire equipment. So if we abandon that, does that mean that the need for that original equipment is no longer there? Or can we expect a request for another 400 grand or whatever the cost is going to be at the time in the near future, given that the need was there and it was approved?
George, a great question. So what we're going to be doing is we will have to submit requests for vehicles or similar vehicles that we currently have working in the fire station now. This was if you recall, I don't know if you went back and looked at what we were doing. We were trying to use the multi-purpose. The chief wanted to use the multi-purpose in lieu of replacing 2 other vehicles. So since we're not going to get that multi-purpose, the fire department will have to make requests for those 2 other vehicles.
Oh, okay. So the need does go away.
No, the need is
for
there.
that vehicle.
It's just not in the multi-purpose vehicle. It will be part of a replacement of existing or similar vehicles that we have in the fleet.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Oh, Sean, are you still? I don't see you on my screen. Are you still here?
Yes, he is.
I
Okay,
think I
Sean,
am.
Sean, do you want to
Um,
ask? Oh, there you are. Do you want to ask the questions? Because Chip, thank you for joining us. Okay.
Sorry
And-
about that.
No, you're fine. And Chip, yes, thank you for joining us. I know that we have access to the feasibility study as well and can give some time to review that. But
Sure.
I'm wondering if you can give us an overview of sort of how you, in the course of that study, get to the 3.5 million number that helps inform some of the town's decision about how much to apply in this particular article.
Sure. Actually, the study that we did, so we started about a little about towards the end of last year, we started working with the chief and the administration, kind of going through assessing the building that you guys have, that this current station. So we activated some of our other consultants, kind of reviewed, updated a previous study we had done a little earlier on that station when we assessed all of the public safety buildings. So we were updating that report, and kind of in concert with that, we worked with the chief to kind of assess the actual needs of the department moving forward. So we sat with them on a number of occasions, and the administration as well, to get their input and really to drill down and find out what the needs are of the building. And the result of that was basically the study, which also includes a site analysis. But it basically gives us, after that assessment and that programming exercise, it basically puts out us, the space, the square footage that the department's going to need moving forward for everything that they have and everything they're going to need. So really what the driver is kind of that the need of the department drives the building design with the square footage that it has, and the specialty needs that the fire departments have these days with all the technology plus all the apparatus and all the needs that of those vehicles. Kind of that gets all put into the mix, and then so basically all of that. So the second part of that is, so the result of that is the feasibility study that was finalized a little over a month ago, that we've reviewed with the select board. So the next piece of that is kind of the what does it take to build the building, and that's where the 3.5 comes from. So it's basically the report, the exercise of the report drives basically the analysis of what the cost is going to be to design that building, the duration that it's going to take to design it. All of that is driven by the square footage and the needs of the building. So that's how we get to the 3.5. Again, some of that is, it's a building plus, as Chris was discussing earlier. We are designing in 2 spaces on a temporary basis, in one location at the American Legion, and for permanent location at the current location, the renovated location, or the rebuilt location at the current location. So the 3.5 is basically takes all those into factors. It's square footage, it's duration the design will take, and kind of all of that factors into it, the needs, and it's all based on the needs of the department.
John, you all set?
Yep, I'm good. Thank you.
Alex?
Excuse me, George.
Yes.
Could someone let Stephanie in? She's in the waiting room. Or she's an attendee. If she could be moved to a panelist, that would be appreciated.
Okay, because she's going to join us for the financial update after this. Alex?
Yeah, thank you, George. I'm just curious. I don't know if anybody on this call can answer the question, but what typically happens in scenarios where fire stations are being rebuilt or renovated in terms of where those firefighters sleep and post up and leave their their trucks and such and so forth during that phase? I'm just curious if there's any sort of similar instances nearby here where and what the solutions have been previously.
I think the closest one, Alex, would be Islington. When the Islington station was built, they where the DPW is now, the DPW is now using that. That's where the temporary station was.
And was that
building to do with the Deerfield? Excuse me, with 90 Deerfield. Excuse me, I misspoke. 90 Deerfield, the American Legion. Let me just be clear, everyone.
Right, Chris. Actually, in Islington, that building was built prior to the Islington Fire Station, taking it over as a temporary headquarters.
Right. So that's the closest that we can get to Westwood, and that's what we're looking to do with the American Legion building.
And what does that look like doing to the American Legion building? Because I think it's I don't know it intimately, but it's a pretty small building with not what I would consider significant attributes similar to what you'd need for a fire station, even in the interim.
Yeah, you're not putting a garage on it, Alex.
No.
You're not putting equipment in it. This is basically just for the firefighters to have a place to stay that's warm and dry.
And I guess will you be putting the trucks in some type of sprung structure? I asked that question to Chip. Do you know that?
Yes, I can speak to this question as well. So the plan would be, and to Alex's question, what's typically done is, it's never a one size fits all, but there are a lot of similarities. At Islington, we temporarily relocated the firefighters to a different site so we could rebuild on the same site. In a project we did in Boston, we did something similar to what we're proposing here. We're more on scale with what we're doing here because there's a few more apparatus and a few more firefighters than at Islington, but it would be a 2-step effort to modify the existing building to account for sleeping quarters, accessible showers, and washrooms, a kitchen space that would be usable, a meeting space and some office space, right? And then in the parking lot area, there would be a temporary facility constructed for the apparatus themselves, and those buildings would be connected, temporarily with, like a temporary piece in to connect the two, but you'd have like a temporary structure for the apparatus, and then the American Legion itself would be for the living and office administrative work of the department.
Okay, Sean, you all set? Anything else you want to ask? Okay, I see Christina has her hand up, and then we'll go to Seth, and then Chris Pareda. Christina.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still like reeling from sticker shock here. I apologize. Is there any possible way that we just reuse the Islington plan since that wasn't that long ago?
The issue, I mean, if I can speak to that, I mean, it's very, so I just did in the background because the question was asked earlier. The proposed building for Fire Station 1 is more than 3 times the size of Islington. It's got 6 apparatus bays, 2, I believe, the 3 at Islington. But the overall square footage is 3 times greater than that of Islington. Islington is a very small station.
And there's no way we could scale it down to be something more reasonable in size?
So with that comes the removal of department needs. So the size that is currently planned for is based on the needs. If it's determined that the needs change and the square footage gets reduced, square footage is the biggest driver of the cost of any building, regardless of what the construction method is. Square footage is the driver. So the only real way to get square footage out of a building like this would be to remove scope, which means fewer beds, fewer apparatus, less equipment, so stuff like that. So it's a change to the program, and it would be compromising what is the needs of the building. But yes, that is something that can be done.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify that we absolutely have to do this right now at 8% interest when we just passed the new high school, when we're facing new buildings for the junior high, when we've got elementary school buildings that need to be repaired. We absolutely have to do this right now.
This is really a matter of urgency, and it's been urgent for a very, very long time. And I think what's important, obviously public safety has to be number one in Westwood. And the building as it exists now is not safe. Chip, you could talk about, the metal bracing that's holding up a portion of the building. It is in very bad shape. It is not big enough to house our firefighters in any condition that any of us, if you went over there, would consider comfortable in any means. And they certainly deserve to have the space that they need to do their job. And what we did as part of the feasibility study, as well as our operational study, is to look into the future as far as the growth of the town. Because this is a building that we want to last. It needs to last for the next 50 years or so. So it's got to have the space to accommodate the growth of the town and what we're going to need as far as our public safety needs. So is it urgent? Yes. And that's why we're bringing this to a special town meeting.
And was it not urgent when we had, when we were talking last year, bringing it at a regular town meeting? Like what brought it to an urgency where we had to do a special town meeting and we couldn't have waited until regular town meeting?
So the feasibility study, I believe, was commissioned, well over a year ago, before I got on the board. And that did take some time to do. And as Chip said, we got the final report a month or so ago. So as soon as we got that information, we wanted to move on that because there is time involved just to get the design done before we can even bring it to a town meeting. And as you well know on FinCom, there are always competing needs, but the feasibility study hadn't been done until recently. As many of you probably know, there have been talks about competing needs, and the town chose to focus on the school, which has been a great success, on time, on budget. But this is the time for the fire station. This is an urgent public safety need.
Okay, Christine, all set? All right, I think 2 more questions. I see Seth, and we'll go back to Chris Pareda. Seth?
Yeah, just one quick question. And by the way, the feasibility study does have really good information on the temporary facilities and stuff. So thanks for that. And that budget's at around $2.5 million for the temporary facilities. Do we have a plan of what that building becomes and how that is used after the new fire station would be built? After we've now made that investment into that, the former American Legion building?
I think that's a great question to ask Mr. Gotti relative to the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. That's exactly the kind of conversation that's happening, Seth. It's going to be a while before we get through the design process. Then we've got to go to construction, hopefully. So it's going to be some time, but you're absolutely right that I think we all need to think very deliberately and thoughtfully about how we can best use that space.
Okay. Chris Pareda will make this hopefully the last question at this point, unless somebody else has an urgent one. Chris?
Yeah, so I look back at the feasibility study that Chris Coleman referred to. I don't know exactly when that was done. I guess about a year and a half ago, but it estimates in that study that the design would be somewhere in the range of 2.2 to 2.6 million. And then you add on to it the bidding costs, that's another 500,000, so you come up to 3.1. We've bandied about the number of 40 million for this project, and it seems like design documents or design monies is about 10% of the total project. At least that's what it's been running in a couple of years I've been on the FinCom. So what happens if 3.5 isn't enough? What happens when you go out to bid the design and you only get bids for more than 3.5 million?
So, Marianne, I can try to answer that. If that's okay.
Sure.
So, Chris, just to clear up something, the feasibility work began about a year ago, but the final report that you're seeing on the website is dated October of 23. So that's just last month. So it wasn't a year ago that they began their work a year ago, but the final report was done last month. So if just like any other project that we would go out to borrow, or that we fund through this type of whether it's a school or a fire station, if there aren't sufficient funds, we have to find available funds. If we needed more, we'd have to scale back, or we'd have to go back to a town meeting if we didn't have available funds without going to town meeting authorization. So that would be for any project of this nature.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at then, Marianne and Chris, is that we've bandied about the number, and it's just a pie in the sky number, about 40 million, right? So, we can always use the money. If we don't spend it, we can always use it for something else if we reauthorize it for it. I would hate to see a project of this urgency get held up because the design, the amount the town authorized for the design work wasn't enough. And you've mentioned inflation and the costs going up even from October of this year. The costs have probably gone up. So take that into consideration when we come back on December 6th, and make sure that we have enough money in this pot. Also, when we bought the American Legion building, we knew going in that it didn't meet present code for certain aspects of it. So this is the work now that we expected to spend money on to make this building adhere to present building codes. And that takes a lot. And Christina, that might account for the extra money above and beyond just the strict design work for the replacement project. So my only concern is make sure we have enough.
Okay, Chris, thank you. I guess excellent questions all around. I think you represent probably a lot of the issues that our town residents have. And as I said at the beginning of our sessions this year, I truly think the challenges for Westwood going forward are not really on the operating budget. It's going to be the capital side, because there are a lot of needs for a limited pot of money. With that, I'd like to thank Chairperson LeBlanc, and I'd like to, Mr. Coleman, thank you, and also to thank the gentleman who joined us from Chip. Thank you very much for joining us. With that, I think that Chairman LeBlanc is going to step off and become sort of just an observer. She's no longer a former panelist, and then we're going to have Stephanie is going to give us a financial update. And I think you all hopefully had a chance to go through the slides. It's very much Stephanie made an excellent presentation to the select board on Monday evening, and I think you get a chance to benefit from that. And my sense is this will also raise some very interesting questions. So with that, Stephanie, can we turn it over to you? And do you need Victoria to screen share your slides, or are you going to do it?
I can do it for my piece. I was actually going to back up first, and if it's okay, introduce the guests I brought along from our financial.
Absolutely. My apologies. And this is the town's financial advisor, who we have listed on here. I believe it's Peter Frazier. So I want to welcome Peter and thank him for joining. And this was to answer some of the questions I think that got raised at last month's FinCom meeting. So thank you, Stephanie, and welcome, Peter. Okay. So how do you want to manage this part of it, Stephanie?
So I've asked, I presented in front of the FinCom back in, I believe it was September, and a number of questions were raised specifically about borrowing and debt. And I'm going to be giving my own presentation tonight, but I really want to bring in the experts to help out in any way possible with that conversation. So here I brought from Hilltop Securities, there are financial advisors, Peter Frazier, he's the managing director, and then Lisa Driscoll is fantastic. They're both fantastic experts in their field. She's a senior vice president. So they're both here, and they just have a short presentation, if that's okay, sort of what they do, what their background is, and then also an overview of municipal finance as it relates to what they do for the town. And then we'll open it up to any questions from the members. Does that sound okay, George?
That's fine. And welcome, Lisa and Peter. So why don't you go ahead?
Well, thank you very much. Just to expand on a short introduction. Again, my name's Peter Frazier. I work for Hilltop Securities, which is a nationwide investment banking firm that specializes in providing municipal entities with advice with respect to borrowing. My colleague, Lisa, there you are, has been with the firm for about 20 years, and I've had the privilege of working with the town of Westwood since the early 90s, and currently work with about 80 Massachusetts municipalities. Our firm, our Boston office, works with about 180 Massachusetts municipalities. So with that, first, let me say thank you to for giving us an opportunity to address you tonight. We do have a brief sort of slide presentation that we'd love to walk through. I don't know, Stephanie, is that something that you can put up, or is
I think I can share. Victoria, would that be? Oh, Victoria already has it, I think. There we go.
I think I did that. Did that work?
This looks fine.
Okay. Well, again, Lisa Driscoll is my colleague's senior vice president. I've had the pleasure of working with her for over 20 years, and she's going to start us off with the first few slides, and then I'll finish up, and then we'll open it up to whatever questions you might have.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us. So this is a presentation that Peter and I give a lot about its borrowing overview, but we've definitely slimmed it down a little bit for tonight's presentation. So we're happy to dive into more detail or answer any questions when we wrap up. Did the slide advance? I can't see if it's advancing. It did. Okay. So all borrowing in Massachusetts is governed by Massachusetts general law, the town's bylaws, and federal laws. So Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 44 is the primary statute for the authorization and issuance of debt in Massachusetts. So Chapter 44, Section 7 is for debt that's considered inside the debt limit. So any tax-supported debt. This would be the town's, building construction projects, land acquisition, and equipment purchases, for example. Debt authorized pursuant to Chapter 44, Section 7 is limited to a maximum of 5% of the town's equalized valuation. Chapter 44, Section 8 is for debt that's considered outside the debt limit. This is revenue-supported debt like water, sewer, or landfill projects, for example. And this debt is not subject to the maximum of 5% of the town's EQV. Eligible school projects that have been accepted by the Massachusetts School Building Authority, the MSBA, are authorized and issued pursuant to Chapter 70B. And the town has worked with this statute with the Hanlon School Project. So with Chapter 70B school project, the MSBA will participate in the project and provide financial support to the town. The projects authorized pursuant to 70B are not subject to the debt limit either. They're considered outside the debt limit. And if the town were to come up with a project that's not covered by any of these statutes, it can petition the general court state legislature for a special act. So an example of this would be in connection with the issuance of a pension obligation bond, for example. There's no general authority to issue POBs in Massachusetts, and the few communities that have done this around the state have received special legislation to issue a POB. So the general laws determine the allowable borrowing purposes, and they also determine the maximum borrowing term for which the town can finance a particular project. So in general, the law says that the term for which the town can finance a project is related to the useful life of the asset. So the idea being that the town, can't issue for a term longer than the equipment, for example, the police cars will be available for use. And then the general law also determines the repayment structure for the issuance of the debt. So unlike the corporate world where there's a fair amount of flexibility in payment structures, Massachusetts is very conservative. Massachusetts doesn't allow municipal swaps for or the issuance of sort of a bullet maturity where everything matures in the final year of an issuance. Massachusetts only lets you issue fixed rate debt. No variable rate debt is allowed. So essentially there's two ways you can structure your debt, either on a level principal basis, where the principal component is equal or declining every year, and your interest is equal or declining every year. Since your interest is calculated on the amount of debt outstanding, it declines every year. And then your other option would be level debt service, which is similar to a home mortgage, where you have an ascending principal structure. And then your interest component is declining, but the sum of your principal and interest is equal each year. Did the slide advance?
Yep.
Okay. So when it comes to financing the debt that the town has authorized, it can be issued on a short-term basis or a long-term basis. So short-term, you would issue a bond anticipation notes or short-term financing in anticipation of a long-term bond or a general obligation long-term bond. So to issue shorter long-term, there's a whole host of factors that goes into deciding this, but this slide just has a few things to consider. One of those being the interest rate environment. So in an environment where rates are really low, the town might consider jumping right into long-term financing and locking in a low rate. When a situation where rates are higher, the town might consider issuing a short-term financing, a ban, in the hopes that when that ban matures, the town can lock in at a lower, more favorable rate. The size of the project being financed is also another consideration. There are issuance costs associated with each transaction. So issuing one larger transaction versus multiple small transactions makes more sense from a cost reduction perspective. And then a larger issue tends to be more attractive from a marketability perspective. The estimated spending schedules or the cash flow requirements of a project are a really important consideration. The town can borrow money on a tax exempt basis for its public purpose capital projects, and it can then invest those borrowed proceeds in higher yielding taxable investments while it draws down on the proceeds to fund the cash flow requirements of the project. So, the town is allowed to earn this arbitrage, this difference between the borrowing rate and the investment rate, so long as it spends the proceeds in prescribed benchmarks that are laid out at the time of borrowing. And so, as long as the benchmarks are met, the town can earn to its heart's delight. But if the spending benchmarks aren't met, it can get into a situation where some of the profits need to be rebated to the federal government. So understanding the cash flow needs of the project and the timing those cash flows with the borrowing becomes very important. And then the budgetary constraints that the town faces is also an important consideration. You know, the town makes its scheduled payments of principal and interest on its existing debt. And as it does that, you know, capacity opens up as debt service rolls off, and that affords the opportunity to layer in new debt. So you can develop a plan to layer in new financings as that capacity does open up. And again, this is just a very condensed list of everything, of things that should be considered. So as far as some borrowing alternatives go, the town can issue general obligation bond anticipation notes as short-term financing in anticipation of a long-term bond, or it can issue a general obligation long-term bond. And both of these are backed by the full faith and credit of the town and its ability to levy taxes to pay the debt service on the obligations. The town can also borrow through the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust for its eligible sewer or water or landfill projects. And this is run through the state treasurer's office, and the trust offers, you know, a subsidized loan rate. And then the town can also borrow through the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority for eligible sewer and water projects. And the MWRA offers 0% loans, and it also sometimes offers grants. And the town does take advantage of both of these programs. And I think Peter's going to pick it up here.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. So the every time the town goes out and borrows on a long-term basis, it goes to the rating agency. In the case of Westwood, it's Standard & Poor's Global Ratings, and has its credit rating or credit assessed by them. And they provide an opinion that essentially, and they assign a rating code. In this case, the rating scale for Standard & Poor's starts at AAA and goes down to AA, single A, and triple B. They're actually ratings that are assigned below that, but they're considered speculative or junk bond ratings. And fortunately, in Massachusetts, there are no municipalities that currently are below investment grade. Moody's has a similar, not exact, but similar sort of scale for their ratings as well. And the important thing here with the ratings is, unlike say a home mortgage, where usually it's kind of a pass fail, either you get accepted or you don't. If you get accepted in terms of your application, you get whatever the going rate is. In this case, it's more finely graded, where the AAA is going to receive lower interest rates because it's correlated with a perceived lower risk of late payment or default. What's our next slide, Lisa? So some of the things that the rating agencies look at when they're making their assessment is the local, regional, and national economy. And that can include sort of economic growth, whether it's increases in property values, what the residents' per capita median family income looks like. It could be, what companies might be moving into the community, or moving out. Institutional framework really relates to sort of the environment, the state environment in which a community is, and it's the municipality's ability to raise revenues. Obviously, we're in a Proposition 2.5 environment in Massachusetts, which isn't absolutely unique, but there are revenue restrictions there, so that's factored into the institutional framework part of the rating. Management is about 20% weighting in the rating score, And it's not just relating to sort of the management's resumes, although that's part of it, and experience. It also relates to the policies and procedures a municipality has in place, understanding that financial managers may come and go, but having some set policies and procedures in place helps with maintaining stability. In terms of finances, the rating agencies look, it's about 30% of the score, and they look at your budgetary performance. The idea is, you know, what kind of surpluses or deficits are you generating annually, as well as what are the levels of reserves that you're maintaining. They'll also be looking at liquidity, you know, sort of what kind of cash you have on hand. And finally, the last major category is debt and contingent liabilities. Not only are they looking at the absolute amount of debt, but how quickly it is amortized. What are the revenues that are used to support that debt? Is it coming from taxation? Is it coming from enterprise type activity? Is it excluded from Proposition 2.5 or not? And the contingent liabilities would refer to your pension and other post-employment benefit liabilities, and how those are being serviced over time, and the size of those liabilities. Next slide, please. So when we get down to talking about the value of a higher credit rating versus a lower, and as I'm sure you all know, Westwood is blessed with the highest rating possible, that being AAA. And so at any given point in time, the Westwood will be able to borrow at the lowest rates sort of available at that time. And this graph simply plots the yield or rates of return an investor would expect to get, and this is a snapshot, by year and by credit rating. So you can see the blue line at the bottom represents AAA. The next line up is AA rated bonds. The next one up is A rated, and finally the BBB rated. So you can see, very clearly that having that higher credit rating produces a substantially lower interest cost, and therefore, in terms of the debt burden, it would be lower for a community like Westwood than somebody with a lower credit rating. And finally, and I promise I'll go through this as quickly as possible. The point of this flow chart is just to show that there's sort of a rational order of things with respect to borrowing in the capital markets. And obviously first step, you figure out what kind of project you want to borrow for and model that debt service. Bond council or the town will draft the article and vote. Town meeting will vote it and has to vote it with at least a 2/3 vote. And you may also exclude it from Prop 2.5 at a special or regular town election with a majority vote. After the vote's successful, bond counsel, which is a law firm that's hired by the town that has expertise in municipal borrowing, will provide a legal requirements letter, essentially all the things that they have to examine in order to provide their opinion as to the validity of the borrowing and also the tax exempt nature of the debt. The treasurer and the legal team, or the financial team, will satisfy those requirements. The financial advisor and the treasurer and the rest of the towns, and in your case, the finance director, will determine, what's to be borrowed, how much, and what the structure of the debt would be, and prepares an official statement. Bond counsel reviews that official statement to make sure everything comports with the federal, state, and local laws. At the same time, this information will be transmitted to Standard & Poor's. They will work with the town, set up an interview essentially to review all the materials as well as all the financial data from the community, and they go back and have a committee meeting and determine what the rating should be. Again, you guys are at the top of the heap with AAA. At this point, the official statement is delivered electronically to hundreds of potential underwriters and investors in anticipation of the sale. And on a particular day, the sale will be conducted. Everything's done over an internet platform at this point. And on the given day and time, up will pop all the bids that the town will receive, ranked in order of lowest interest rate to highest. And obviously the award's going to go to the underwriter that provides the best deal or the lowest interest cost to the community. At which point the underwriter's informed that they're the winner. They run off and start reselling these bonds pending settlement. Bond counsel prepares all of the closing documents and the actual bond certificates. That then goes back to the town, to the select board, which will vote to approve the results of the sale, sign the bonds and closing documents. Those documents gets sent to bond counsel, and the original signed bonds will go to DTC, which is the Depository Trust Company, which is a repository that holds all of these documents. Everything now is done electronically in terms of the transactions in these bonds, but a single bond per maturity of the bond issue is safe kept at DTC until the bonds are all paid off. And the next step is that the underwriter will credit the bond proceeds to the town on the settlement day, and the town will then be provided with schedules by purpose and in total of principal and interest payments from the sale. And each one of these blocks I could probably go on and on about for a half an hour, but in the interest of your time, we're going to spare you that. But please know that we'd be happy to answer any questions tonight, or if there's an interest and you want to delve into any of these things more deeply, we'd be eager to help with that.
Okay, thank you. Can we go back to, all right, I already see one hand up. First of all, thank you both for your presentation, and I see a question from George Maroon. George?
Thank you, George, and thank you, Peter and Lisa. Do you have an opinion on the use of interest rate swaps to mitigate interest rate volatility?
The problem, George, is in Massachusetts, you don't have that option. There's no, I think Lisa mentioned, no swaps, no variable rate debt. You know, the idea is the Massachusetts general laws don't give you enough rope to hang yourself. You know, it's very conservative in terms of their approach. And I think, you know, largely it's probably a good thing for local municipalities not to be able to get into more sophisticated or might be determined to be more risky investment or borrowing.
So it's actually prohibited? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Thank you both very, very much. If there are any follow-up questions from members of the Finance Commission through Stephanie, we will get them to you. So thank you both.
Thanks again for the opportunity. Take care.
Moving along. Stephanie, are you going to do your financial update, is what we have called it?
Yes, great. And I think I don't know if Rob Gotti wants to be let in now or if he wants to wait. He's going to sort of be picking up on the tail end of this, I think.
Let me ask if Marianne, if Chairman LeBlanc, has she dropped off and become an observer at this point in time? She's not a panelist? If that's correct, I think it's appropriate. If Rob Gotti wants to join, that's fine.
Good evening, everybody. I am here, and take it
So-
away, Stephanie, in the interest of everyone's time.
I know. Sorry. I'm sorry to have pulled you in. Okay, so I gave first I gave an update to the FinCom back in September where I sort of walked through the financial policies that the town has and the highlights of all of those. I also gave an update on Monday night to the select board, sort of along the same path, but I focused in on the current reserves that the town has, as well as our debt policies. So I'm going to be doing the same this time around, and I'm going to bring this up. And thankfully, it actually works out because most of what was just presented is what I was going to go over. So that just cut down on some of my slides. Victoria, is it okay if I share?
Yes.
And you can see that okay?
Yep.
All right, great. So this is just an overview. The select board adopted the set of financial policies originally in 2004, and they were most recently updated in 2022. We like to review them every 2 to 3 years or so. So this is just a list of all the highlights of those policies. And again, we went through a lot of these back in September, so I won't focus on the first half of it, but I do want to particularly go over the reserve funds for the town. The town works to maintain a level of reserves that protect us from emergency conditions that also follow the requirements to maintain the high credit rating that Peter and Lisa were just talking about. So we want to give financial flexibility, but then also stay within our policies for that credit rating. Those reserve accounts include the stabilization fund, the capital improvement stabilization fund, and the meals and hotel tax. I'm also going to be going over the debt policies for the town and how it relates to our current debt status. And I think I'll get right into. So one of our reserves, we don't usually call it that, but it has to do with free cash. So I went over this as well in our last meeting, but I just wanted to highlight back on sort of what free cash is and what that means currently for the town. So it's the remaining unrestricted funds from operation of the previous fiscal year, including actual receipts in excess of revenue estimates, so our revenue budget, and also any unspent amount in budget line items. And as I had reported before, the current DOR certified amount of free cash for the town is just under 11 million, and it is higher than the prior year of the 7.7 million that was certified. And I had presented that the main driver of this was the increase in FY23 revenue from local receipts, and in particular the impact of both the higher than normal cash balance due to the borrowing of the elementary school project, as well as a higher interest rate available. And Peter sort of went over that a little bit, how we are able to sort of benefit from those higher rates with cash that's in the bank and earning what we call investment income. So the combination of these factors just created a unique situation for the town. I had said that we don't anticipate this happening again in the future, but that is a main driver of why that balance is higher than normal. And this is just a quick chart on the history of free cash use at town meeting, as well as what DOR has certified the town's free cash and July 1st of each of the years listed. So as you can see, as I said, it was about 7.7 on July 1st of 2022. The certification this year was just under 11 as of July 1st of 2023. These amounts in here are what was actually allocated at town meeting for use of free cash. I've added in an estimate as we go through this upcoming budget cycle this season. This is going to be an important factor on what we can allocate towards different articles. For example, we fund the FinCom reserve as part of free cash. It's the 405. We allocate $125,000 each year through an article towards our stabilization fund. We also do our base capital, our base school and municipal capital through free cash, as well as what we call additional capital articles. Last year, town meeting, the most recent annual town meeting in May, we funded a lot of that additional capital articles through meals and hotel tax. It was $1.1 million, which is another reason that free cash sort of built up for this year, because we didn't utilize as much. So moving forward during this budget cycle, we can discuss how that can be utilized more this year. And so as far as the financial policies and how they relate to free cash, the unallocated free cash target per our financial policies is 4% of the general fund operating budget net of debt service. So for FY24, that amount is $100 million. So which would equal $4 million to reach that 4% target. So, and as we just heard, this is a large factor in an important component of the credit rating that the town has. And then any additional free cash beyond that is really used for capital expenses and not ongoing operational needs for the town. And I know there was a specific question, I think, asked about this, so I did want to give an update on the reserves and how they relate to our financial policies and also the current balances in each of those accounts. So per the financial policies, the town shall maintain reserve accounts at a minimum of 8% of the net general fund operating revenue. So I'm going to say that number a lot tonight, and I had called it the magic number the other night, so I'm going to continue saying that. So that magic number is 105 million. So all the percentages I'm going to calculate off of that, that's the number. So the total target for the most current fiscal year, FY24, is 8%, which is 8.4 million. 4% of that should be reserved in what we call the general fund reserves, which is that free cash amount. So that would be that 4 million. And then also 4% in the stabilization fund. So the target amount for FY24 for that fund would be 4.2 million. The current balance in our stabilization fund is 3.9. And just to give a reminder on the background of that account and what it was set up for, it provides temporary financing for any unanticipated or unforeseen extraordinary need, so of an emergency nature. This is also another key component in what it gets the town their AAA credit rating. Another reserve account is the Capital Improvement Stabilization Fund. We currently are not doing an annual appropriation into this account. The last time there was one was in FY18, and the current balance for that account is 1.5 million. And just as some background here, the last time I think a project was done out of this, it was for a turf field renovation. So that's just an example of what this fund has been used to fund in the past. And then the last one is just our meals and hotel tax fund that was set up. That was originally set up by town meeting, and I think it was 2017. The main use of this is to provide funding for townwide capital assets, supplemental of the ongoing capital budget process, which is just a fancy way of, we usually call it the additional capital articles. And the current balance is, as of September 30th this year, in that account is 1.3 million. And so tax revenue for FY23, the total revenue budget for the town was 113.6 million, just as some guidance there. 80% of that revenue is taxes. So it's the most important component of the town's financial stability, right? So property taxes remain a stable source of revenue and currently make up that 80% of the town's budget. However, as Peter sort of just alluded to, we're limited, right? So Proposition 2.5 in Massachusetts limits the total property taxes a community can raise. We cannot go above that 2.5% plus new growth. And that's not the calculation applied to individual tax bills. It is a limit on the total overall taxes a town can raise each year. So there is a way for the town to override these limits through two different options, and they both involve town meeting. One is a general override, and it's for additional funds for any purpose, and it permanently increases the levy limit. Westwood has not gone to that option of a general override since 2007. The other one is a debt exemption. This is to pay for capital projects, and the annual debt service is added to the tax levy. So it's outside of our regular budget. Dedicated taxes are levied for that project. It is not permanent, and the taxes end when the bond for that project ends. I'm not going to go through this in much detail because I think that flow chart did a good job of doing it. This is how debt is, general debt is authorized, issued, and then what the repayment schedule looks like, and just our prudent debt management. The two things I will point out, because I'll be going over them later, is that when we issue bonds, when the bids come back, we enter into a repayment schedule that Peter mentioned. So this is a schedule of all current bonds issued, and we do update this annually. It's produced as part of our capital budget book. We also monitor it throughout the entire fiscal year. And then the current repayment schedule as well, that's updated annually and supplied as part of the capital budget project book, and then also monitored throughout the year. And only the debt service scheduled to be repaid in that year will be included in that year's budget. So options for borrowing, again, we went over this in the prior presentation, short-term versus long-term. Debt service budget, so the repayment schedule I just mentioned is through general fund revenue. So that includes principal and interest payments included in each year's annual operating budget. And then there's sort of two types of debt that I'll be running through. It's exempt and non-exempt. So exempt debt is anything that requires a debt exclusion and is added to the levy limit. So as an example, the most recent elementary school project. So it's additional tax revenue raised to pay for the debt service until that debt is retired, when the bond and the taxes end. Non-exempt debt is tax revenue funds are set aside as part of the annual operating budget. So we call it our debt service budget. It's within Prop 2.5. It's not levied above that, and it's included in our annual budget. And we target new debt sold to replace any old debt that's dropping off. The big highlight of this is that the town has capacity limits which prevent us from using debt to finance all of our capital projects. And this is sort of just getting into the meat of what I want to go over. So the question comes up of debt capacity. What is the town's debt capacity? And I tried to break it down into 4 bullets of what our capacity is governed by. So the town's debt capacity is governed by these 4 factors that all need to be considered when we're discussing the town's financing and borrowing options. Legal debt limit. Lisa already went over this. She mentioned the legal limit per Mass General laws is what Westwood is allowed to have outstanding at any point in time for debt. We are not near this number. I calculated specifically for Westwood based on our most recent EQV value. 5% of that is 274 million. And I'll get into the amounts later, but we are currently not near that amount. However,
Nor do I think we will ever get near that amount.
thank you. And I think Lisa had mentioned, you know, that's one part of it, but then town should, just to be financially prudent and be conservative, and also so that we can get that AAA rating, come up with our own financial policies, right? So when we look at debt for ourselves and what the town can and should handle, we came up with 2 specific numbers around debt and how we should adhere to that based on our financial policies. So the first one is that non-exempt debt should not exceed 8% of net general fund revenue. So if you remember that magic number, so that 8% for FY24 is 8.4 million. The total general fund debt should not exceed a cap of 12% of that number. So FY24, that is 12.6 million. So that's exempt and non-exempt combined. And then also we have to think about the budget, right? So any increased debt service specifically for non-exempt debt places stress on the operating budget. And I say that because this non-exempt debt does not have its own dedicated revenue source as far as levying above that Prop 2.5. So it's all within our operating budget. So if that budget wants to increase to take on new projects, that it's all one bucket. So that has to come from other places within the operating budget. It does not have a dedicated tax revenue debt service for it. And then also lastly, but definitely not least, is the impact on taxpayers. So projects funded with long-term debt that are exempted from Prop 2.5, we should really identify the impact on the annual tax rate and the tax bill due to a debt exclusion. And I know we do that. We usually present every time we have a project come up, you know, what's the impact going to be on the tax bill? And what does that look like for the cost each year? So this is specifically for non-exempt debt, what we call debt within Prop 2.5. So as I just went over, the financial policies for that are the 8%. It should not exceed that. Our current debt level, as you can see, is well within that guideline, where the FY24 total debt payment, which is also our budget, within Prop 2.5 is 3.3 million. So as you can see, the maximum of 8.4, if we were to borrow for projects up to that budget, as I just alluded to, the additional, say, 5 million, 5.1 million would need to come from other places within our same operating budget of revenue funds, because it's not raised on the tax levy. So to that end, whenever possible, new debt payments are issued as prior debt rolls off, because it can keep that budget, that debt payment at the approximate same level. And then also, just to note, this debt service budget for non-exempt also needs to fit in on our ongoing capital equipment needs. So this isn't just for the large construction projects, right? This is anytime DPW needs a piece of equipment that is large enough we would borrow for, or the fire department, that all needs to fit within this as well. And this is just a chart of the last 10 or so fiscal years and what that budget has looked like, those payments for non-exempt debt have looked at. And as you can see, the last, 8 years or so, it's been pretty level. The last time there was a spike in that is when the town was able to fund the police and fire construction projects through borrowing within our current non-exempt budget because of the additional new growth from University Station, right? Which makes sense that it happened around that time. There was additional new growth because of that development. We utilized those funds within the budget to fund construction projects, which was a great thing for the town. And then since then, as I'll show later, nothing significant has really dropped off or come on. So it's been able to stay within that level budget. And then as an example for how we do that, we do it a lot with DPW road bonds. So there was a 10-year bond issued in 2012, and the last payment was made in FY22. This freed up space, so we brought on a new DPW road bond at 4.65 million to take on that capacity as it dropped off. So outside Prop 2.5, which is, as I was calling the exempt debt, these are the annual payments. As you can see, debt naturally declines over the years just due to the natural decline, and then also anything falling off. A big example of this was the high school construction project. The bond, the last payment was in FY23. The town strategically tried to hold off the financing so that the first payment for the elementary school project that's currently going on to be made in FY24. So some of that impact from that new bond was absorbed between the high school bond ending. Other examples of projects funded this way were the library. And as you can see, this is just an example of what the high school and library payments were in FY22, just to give you an idea of the cost. So when the high school bond ended, what we call rolled off, that excess capacity was absorbed with some of the impact from the elementary school project.
And Steph, just to highlight here, right, that big jump that you see from fiscal year 23 to 24 is the school project coming online. And if you took this chart back out to the left to say the year 2000, you would have seen a similar stable declining period of time. And then when Westwood High School was approved, basically a similar proportional rise. So, I think it's important to put this into a broader context.
Yes, absolutely. A similar proportional jump, right, for when that project would have come on. That's correct. And then also the town does refinance whenever possible. We take advantage of any savings that can come from refinancing a bond. An example of that was in 2021 when the library was refinanced as a total savings to the tune of $760,000, which is significant. That's an approximately $75,000 per year savings for the remainder life of the bond. So less money that we have to levy on the taxpayers. Don't look too closely at this, but I was showing this the other night just to highlight when I talk about, we always say bonds ending and the payments rolling off. That's sort of hard to visualize. So I just wanted to show this with these little boxes drawn for when examples of when projects are ending and dropping off and when capacity is freeing up. So just as an example right here, this land purchase, the payments are steadily dropping. Here's the one for FY24. We'll have one in 25 and 26, and then the bond ends. So we'll have freed up capacity in FY27. That's just what I wanted to highlight there. This is that other, so that was that schedule I say we update every year to be provided in the capital budget book. This is the other one. It's our long-term outstanding debt. This is current as of, so what it will be June 30th of 2024. So what that will look like, the total amount of general fund outstanding debt that the town has is about 84 million. If you include the sewer debt, that number goes up a bit from the 100,000 for sewer. So total general fund and sewer debt outstanding is just under 84 million. And this is just a listing. And I think one of the members highlighted this earlier. And this is just a listing of all projects that are currently outstanding with any debt that we have issued. And this is a chart to just highlight that and what that has looked like over the years. So when we say that things are naturally declining, dropping off, bringing on new projects, that's sort of how that curve works. As you can see, it's been pretty steady for a number of years. And then the new elementary school project was brought on. So that's just why that spike happens. And this includes debt that has been authorized at town meeting and then also issued long-term. But we also have to keep in mind that we have debt that has been authorized by a town meeting but has not yet been issued long-term. So an example of that I brought up last time, and Lisa sort of highlighted in her presentation, we can do a ban, which is a short-term borrowing option. It depends on a number of factors that she went through. But then there's also items that have been authorized that we haven't gone out for just yet. Examples of that is the rest of the elementary school borrowing. A large chunk of that was done at the beginning of the project. We still have a remaining amount less any MSBA reimbursement that we would still need to go out for, as well as a few projects that were just funded at the last annual town meeting. So we look at that debt schedule service with the boxes I just showed, with things rolling off and freeing up capacity. Not everything is included in that. And when we look at these things as a whole here in our finance department, we account for these projects that we anticipate borrowing for. And so that sort of leads me into the next slide and my last slide of, when we talk about debt capacity and all this rolling off and new things coming on and the natural decline and how we bring on new payments to fill for that anticipated drop, what does that really look like in the next couple of years? And I sort of tried to put together a chart of a snapshot of the next 6 fiscal years of what those numbers will be. These are estimated, but they're pretty accurate based on our current budget. So for FY25, with things that are dropping off their last payment being in FY24, or things, the natural decline from year to year, for non-exempt, that number is about 300,000. And for exempt, it's about 355,000. And I will highlight, I added notes down here. This amount right here is pretty much fully already spoken for with debt approved at the last 2 annual town meetings. So that ban that I was speaking about that we went out to short term when we go long term for that, and then the 2 projects that were most recently voted at the annual town meeting. And then this exempt debt number, the capacity that's being freed up, is going to be used for whatever we go out to borrow long term on the remaining of the elementary school construction project. It's authorized, but it hasn't been issued yet. So as you can see, these numbers for the next 5 fiscal years are not significant. They're not significantly high. The next drop for exempt debt in particular is not until 2031 when the library construction bond ends, and then 2035 for non-exempt debt is the next significant drop for the Islington Fire Station. There is a road bond ending in 2032, but as I mentioned, the plan of the town is usually to bring on new road bonds, so that capacity is pretty much already spoken for. And I was trying to highlight for you, trying to come up with a way to put this into terms of, okay, what do these numbers mean and what could this fund? So in general terms, with a lot of assumptions, meaning a 5% interest rate, 30-year level debt service, each $100,000 of this capacity due to a drop-off or any kind of increased debt budget could support approximately a $1.5 million bond. So So significant, but not a large construction of a new building. So I just wanted to put that in terms. Rob, do you want me to jump in? Do you want me to?
I think this
questions?
is a good transition. And George
Okay.
asked me to come talk about what the long range financial planning committee has been up to and sort of what's on our horizon. So let me pull up something to share a little screen here. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the Long Range Financial Planning Committee, it was originally formed in 2003, but it was dissolved in 2019. And when I became chair in 22, one of the first things that I wanted to do was reestablish this, because the reality is, I think we all know we have a list of projects longer than our ability to fund in all one fell swoop. And so it really requires a community conversation around how do we manage all this. So the group was formally appointed in October of last year. Our first meeting after getting everybody on board was held in February. And the original plan was we were going to meet quarterly, given the sort of long range nature of the discussions. We changed that to monthly in order to study and provide some guidance on a few timely issues related to some broader term, long-term projects. Let me just give you a quick sense of who all's on the committee. So in addition to myself, Julianne Bride, Nancy Hyde is the representative from the Board of Assessors, Nancy James, Melissa McDonough, Paula McLaughlin, Chris Paff is our rep from the Planning Board, Maya Plotkin from the School Committee, Phil Shapiro as our treasurer, and Paul Tesseri as our tax collector, Dan Weller and Skip Wells. These are all folks who have been involved in any number of boards and committees for a long period of time in town. And it's also comprised of subject matter experts, as of ex officio members, town council, our town administrator, and the rest of the ex officio members that you see here, including our new superintendent, Tim Pivovar. All right, so what is the sort of mission? As I said, it's long-term in nature, and it's to provide thoughtful input to the select board on both sort of the prioritization and timing of major projects, things for us to think about with respect to the long-term needs of the community. And a big part of that is trying to balance the tax impact on residents. You saw that on one of Stephanie's earlier bullets in terms of the things governing how we manage the overall approach to taxation and projects. This is a list of some of those major projects listed in no particular order.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a little box on your right, on the left.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm showing the. Let me flip this. Hold on. Let me swap displays so you're seeing this one. Yes. Right. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So this is a list of some of the major projects that have been listed at different times in the capital book for longer range type of things. These are listed in no particular order intentionally, but it sort of highlights that we have some major needs. And so one of the things that we did was we took on Monday night, the select board approved the use of $500,000 in unrestricted ARPA money to conduct a facility study. And the goal of that is to assess both the extent and the urgency of the various needs from our different facilities, so we can also get a better sense of cost. And then the school portion will allow the superintendent and the school committee to discuss their needs as well as their vision for the educational learning environments that they would like to see in our community. And it allows us on the municipal side to discuss and assess creative options for fulfilling the various municipal projects that are on our side of the ledger. And at some point, it also will allow for a collective conversation once the school has done their side and we have done our side for how might we best utilize existing resources to fulfill some of those needs to help minimize the burden on the taxpayer. I believe when Stephanie and Marianne presented to you all back in October, if it was, I think George Maroon asked a question that was very similar to a question that we asked when we first met as the Long Range Financial Planning Committee. What does our overall debt capacity look like relative to our financial policies? So this next slide shows the green area here is basically straight lining out our budget growth at a roughly 3% annually. That's your Prop 2.5% plus a little bit room for new growth. The black bars is our current debt, okay? And this is the total ceiling of 12% that naturally grows as the budget grows. The next slide here, I think is actually one that if I jump, I think I have your original version stuff, so I gotta.
You want me to?
Would you pull up the next the next couple slides on your
Of
side?
course. Do you mind stop sharing and I'll?
Yep, go ahead. I'm sorry, I have an earlier version here where we made a change to this particular slide.
Just stop the sharing real quick.
Okay, I thought I did. Hold on.
I think up the top, there should be like a red button at the top of your screen that says stop
Not
sharing.
showing for some reason. Hold on.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So jump to, yes, this one. All right, so go back to that one real quick.
Okay.
So the purple line is the 12% total debt ceiling. And then the non-exempt debt ceiling that Stephanie talked about at 8% also grows with that budget growth of 3% annually. And so what you see here is the dark blue is our current non-exempt debt. That's the debt within Prop 2.5. The purple is our current exempt debt. And so that includes the current Pine Hill schools in here. So as you then start to look at, you see that's declining over time and your budgets, your debt ceiling is growing, creating some space. So
Rob,
what would that look like if
before
we
you do
start?
that, can I ask you a question on this?
Absolutely.
Your non-exempt debt ceiling of 8%. But the reality is your policy says right now we're staying at 4%, correct? So
our policy states that it's at 8%.
But we're at a lower level of
Correct.
okay, so my concern is a little bit of if you took out, instead of using a ceiling of 8%, we don't go to we've never gone to the 8%, correct?
Correct.
Where are we really at? What's our policy? We keep it around that $3.94 million.
Our practice has been around that 3% number, which has been that $3.3 million number that Stephanie showed.
Doesn't this then artificially inflate what your total debt ceiling is if we're never going to go above?
No, they're two different numbers, right? So the debt ceiling, that line that's at 8%, corresponds to the blue portion of the bar. The purple line up at the top here, that is the total combined debt ceiling. So you're right, George. We have maintained some real discipline around keeping that at that 3.3 or 3% number, because as Stephanie highlighted earlier, it's a dollar for dollar trade-off on the operating budget. When you start to increase beyond that 3%, now you're talking about that's a trade-off with services, right? We have an operating budget that we need to deliver and maintain the town services the way we have them today.
Yeah, but
if
Rob,
we were to go out with exempt debt, non-exempt debt within Prop 2.5 that came up near that 8%, we would have to make significant cuts in services. So I understand the sort of nature of the question, right? But this is just showing you what our financial policies state. The financial policies state the 8%.
Yeah, but what worries me is, and I'm not, what worries me though, you're sort of overstating what the 12% really is, because it's the 8% plus 4% to get to the 12%. But in reality, the base is a lot lower. We're not going to go above the 3% number, Rob. The reality is we're not going to do it.
So let's continue with the next couple of slides, George, and I'll illustrate that. So if we were to add, say, a project at $40 million, and that were to come on, so that is still, that is exempt debt. It comes with its own taxes, right? Because the voters would have voted to approve it. And so that gets us to total debt of roughly a little bit more than 8%. And then as the payments begin, it starts to come down. And again, as your ceiling continues to rise with the overall budget.
Sorry, can I just chime in for a second? Have we projected what that's going to do to our credit rating if we take out that much additional debt?
We haven't projected that, but that's exactly what we discussed with our financial advisors before we move forward with any project. They have compared us right now. They actually said that they could do this for me. It's a great question, so I can follow up with them on this. But there is an option to compare Westwood to other communities and what other communities currently have outstanding in debt and how it would affect our credit rating. It is something we can do, but I don't have it with us right now.
Because I think we're really going to need that, because we're going to need to understand, once we're done with these two very large projects, this elementary school and then potentially this fire station. And then when we go to take out more money for the additional projects that are in line, how much extra is that really going to cost us? We really have a fiscal obligation to our taxpayers here.
And Christina, you're right. And that's part of what this long range financial planning committee is all about, is to have those discussions and to help ask those questions. When there were some questions yesterday that got into things around the current budget planning cycle, I said, hold on a second. That's not in our purview. That's actually the purview of the FinCom. Is there, you guys do a great job of reviewing what the town proposes each year and ask questions with respect to that current set of warrant articles going before the community. This is trying to take a longer term view and say, we need to have some, and I welcome every one of these questions, because this is part of the collective conversation that we need to have as a community to address the types of needs that we have. So this shows, if you add that one project starting in 26, now if you were to add a second project, okay, this is what that begins to look like, with the assumption that it comes online in some fashion, probably for your design bid stuff in 2029, and then really kicks in 2030. And so you can see, yes, we are challenging our own policies. And let's not forget bullet 4 on Stephanie's slide, that comes with the discussion of the residents' ability to pay. So that's George. That's ultimately the point you're making of, well, 8% on the non-exempt side is, we're never going to come close to that. And you can see right here, there's not a plan to increase that. It's actually decreasing over time as this sort of holds true. So this is, the type of thing where, as we add some additional projects, we have real discussions that we need to have with respect to what, how, and when. And that's why that facility study that the Long Range Financial Planning Committee recommended to the Select Board, and the Select Board approved on Monday night, gets us to a place where we understand the need, both from a scope and an urgency standpoint, as well as it gives us sort of a foundation to have a creative conversation to say, how might we repurpose existing things? So I believe it was Seth asked, what's going to be the use of the Legion building after the fire department is done? We'll be able to start to have some answers to that and some plans. once we are, through this facility study, to begin those conversations of how and what we might do to give ourselves the best option to, get the things that we need done, while also trying to do that while minimizing the impact on the taxpayer.
Sorry, just one more follow-up question.
Sure, yeah.
In the facility study, like, have we explored existing space, like rather than building a new American
That's all part of the
Legion, like,
conversation. I think you're 100% right. So
like, are we going to use the senior center or the existing space within the new elementary school that we decided to build extra space to have more public space available, and then now we're saying nope, just kidding, we're going to build more public space again and take out more debt.
So there's needs, right? So when I think one of the questions you asked Marianne earlier was, what's the urgency of this fire station project? I can tell you that the fire station project was a need 10 years ago, and as a temporary fix, they put lally columns in the underside of it to hold up the back wall, which is actually separating from part of the building, because when it was built in the 50s, the weight of the equipment and the trucks was very different than it is today. So for 10 years, there's been a temporary solution in place. So, these are discussions that we need to have, and that's part of why that group exists.
Rob,
that's great. Yeah.
Did you finish all your slides you wanted to present?
That's the end of the slides. The only thing that I wanted, Steph, could you go back to the one slide that showed the change in the non-exempt debt piece with when University Station came online? Because the other piece of what long-range planning needs to talk about.
This right here, Rob?
Yes, this one. This to me highlights the importance of new growth in our ability to continue to be the type of community that we want to be in terms of providing the services and having the facilities. We don't have new growth. Prop 2.5 is really, really challenging. I mean, so, at some point, we can't just be talking about the cost side of the ledger. We need to be talking about the revenue side of the ledger as well. Our economic development director, Nora Locknane, is going to come to our January meeting. We're going to get some updates on some projects that are at various stages of development that will help add new growth. But keep in mind, we only have 6% of our land in town that is zoned for commercial use. So it makes it incredibly challenging. In order to have some of that growth, at some point we may need some rezoning and things like that. But all of that is part of what the conversation needs to be in order for us to be able to do the types of things that we want to do and be able to do it in a sustainable and affordable fashion.
So Rob,
I get that, but is it the
hold on, Chris,
driving the horse here? Like, we're building the demand by adding all these projects, and then we're saying, oh wait, now we have to rezone, build retail, get more tax dollars. We're creating an artificial demand for those new tax dollars.
The needs are real, right? If you go to the fire station 1, have them give you a tour, you'll see that the need is real. You go to Sheehan, you'll see that the need is real. So those are things that we have legitimate needs in the community to service our residents. The question becomes, how do we afford them, and how might we most creatively come up with the solutions while trying to do it in a responsible way fiscally?
Rob, are you all done with your presentations now?
I am happy to take any questions.
I want to thank you and Stephanie for preparing the information. Let's open it up now to members of FinCom, either questions on the slides that Stephanie presented or going to the material that Rob presented. So I see, first of all, I see John Kerry has his hands up. John.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask about the facilities study. Is that been completed or that's being completed? And if it's being completed, do we have a date for delivery?
So we don't have a date for delivery yet. We literally just approved the concept and the funding of that on Monday night. The next step will be to have folks provide proposals on that. Chris, you can probably talk to that process and what the likely timing is. And those two things there's actually two components to that study, John. One is the school side, the other is municipal side. And so they can sort of run on parallel or independent tracks, but we're going to try and have the same firm conduct the audit so that there's consistency across all of the different facilities as they're looked at.
Thank you. I see Jim, do you have a question?
Thank you. For Stephanie. Stephanie, thank you for your presentation. I'm sure you see these numbers and hear it in your sleep, but for someone who only hears it once or twice a year, it's nice to hear it again and again. That being said, on slide 9, and we heard this definition a couple of times, the town equalized valuation. What is that? Who determines that and how? Excuse me, who determines that and how?
The equalized valuation, I don't have the calculations for it, but it's part of our ACFR each year, our financial report that comes out. It's governed by Mass General Law, how it's calculated, and that we have to stay within that 5% and all the other rules that come into that. It's pretty complicated. You can also go up to 10% for that, depending on certain situations. But that number that is in there, the 5.48 billion, was as of our last published ACFR financial report, which I believe was in that number is based off of 2022. So 5% of that is where I got the 274 million from.
Well, I guess it's good we're not going to approach that.
Yeah, I mean,
But,
it's like 3 times where we are right now. There's no way we'll ever get close to that.
And that compares to that number that I stated that was total outstanding of the 83 million. So just to put that into comparison is where we currently are.
Right. Thank you. Just in a follow-up to it, our last meeting, you had mentioned there were a couple of school funding, bond funding issues that hadn't been funded. What's the status of those?
Still the same. So the project, we've been monitoring this, and we knew from the beginning of when the first piece of the project was put out and the bond was executed, we knew that there was going to be a tail end piece. We're timing when that happens based on the spending projections of the project itself. So every month we're in contact with the school project, with Vertex, the company that's overseeing that, as to how they're spending and what they're projected to spend. So now that we see we're coming close to the end of the funding of what we've already borrowed for, we're going to be meeting probably December, January timeframe with the town treasurers as well as Peter and Lisa to determine when we should go out for that extra piece. So the status is the same. Does that answer the question? Are you looking for a number or sort of just the status on it?
No, I mean, they were bond funding issues that were already passed. I think one was a design or I think it was one of the design fundings of handling that were at completion. So if it hasn't gone out for funding and we're done with the project, are we going to call back that bond, or are we still going to spend it? Or
are you talking about that initial phase, the like 202,000 that I have listed as authorized but not yet issued?
I think that's the one. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah. So yes, it is authorized. It is there. It's listed because that's sort of just a chart of what I have to list as authorized and not yet issued long term. As far as what the plans are for that, it can be, I believe, I don't want to misspeak, but it can be reappropriated to other pieces of the project, I believe, through the correct process there. So it could be allocated towards the construction piece of the project.
But I heard earlier the construction's on budget, you know, also taking into consideration the ARP funds. So would that money,
when we talk about it, and let me clarify, the budget piece of the project, they're doing a fantastic job. It's coming in on budget. All these numbers roll up to the original, when the original article was voted for the construction for the elementary school project. I believe the authorized amount was 87.8 million. That number includes the bridge funding, the design fund, everything that was included in that number. So when I speak about this, it all rolls up into that. Does that make sense?
It just hasn't been it just hasn't been put out to bid.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see Mr. Freida's hand up, and then we will go to Seth. Chris.
Okay, one for Stephanie, one for Rob. Stephanie, could you, for those of you who might not understand, can you explain what the FinCom reserve really is?
So that is a requirement to set up a fund for any unforeseen or emergency situations. It was previously from FY23 back, it was funded through the operating budget. As of FY24, we're now funding that through free cash. Examples of how that has been utilized is snow and ice. So we're allowed to overspend our snow and ice budget. So at the end of the year, if those costs have exceeded our regular budget, we go before FinCom and ask for funds to be appropriated, and then we do that transfer through Article 1 or 2 at town meeting.
All right, so just to be clear, even though it's called the FinCom reserve, the FinCom does not control it.
Well, in the sense of that you have to approve any funds used from it, yes.
We're not living large on the town's dime because of it. All right.
No, that is reserved for, there's specific language for what that can be used to fund. We couldn't buy a piece of equipment with it. It is specifically set aside for unforeseen and emergency situations.
Okay. And for Rob, one of the projects that you listed that this long range committee is looking at is I noted in the book too, it said Gay Street sidewalk construction. But there are an awful lot of roads in town that could benefit from a sidewalk. We just saw some angst about one of those projects on Canton Street. So what I would ask that you do is to go back to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Committee and have them give your long range committee a list of sidewalk projects in their priority that committee thinks should be done. So you can factor that into the list of other capital projects that the long range committee is looking at.
Yeah, as I said earlier, Chris, that is a list of projects that have been at different times or had been on the 5-year capital plan. And some of the things had a TBD timing, etc. So that is where that list originated. And so that's why that list existed. And there are things on there that, I don't know the entire status of these days. One of the ones that's on there is Hale. And as you know, I had to recuse myself from participating in it. So I can't even speak to where that thing stands.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we would all benefit from a comprehensive list of things, no matter how outlandish and no matter how TBD it might be, just to get a list of things that might be before us.
And
that's one of the things that your committee should be doing.
Well, that's also part of the whole Complete Streets project that the DPW did, right? And Todd has reviewed that with them on, I believe, more than one occasion. And so some of the things that get done based on size, scope, sort of contiguous nature to other projects that are going on. So yes, it would be nice to have their list, but that list, there's got to be some flexibility in how and when those things get done to, basically create some efficiencies for DPW as well.
All right, thanks.
Okay, let me turn it over. Seth.
Yeah, thanks. Just to clarify we mentioned earlier how we won't get close to that long-term debt ceiling, that 260 to 80 million mark. But if we're over 80 now, and if I look at the 5-year capital improvement plan, in the next 4 fiscal years, there's $132 million just in major building projects, not in other capital request projects, which by my math puts us at that 200+ million mark.
And
keep in mind that 5%, that 5% EV, Stephanie, changes with the town as well, correct?
Correct. So every time the town's value is reassessed, which it will again very soon, and I'll actually come up with that new number for you. it could be reassessed, and that 5% number could go up to $320 million. So because it's a percentage, that will increase as the value of the town increases. And, 10 years out from now, when those projects are all technically, under Rob's example, 10 years when all those projects are on, that number could be close to 400.
Totally appreciate how that number grows, the town grows as a percentage. Just pointing out that in 4 fiscal years, we're projecting that number to be decently over 200 million.
Those things were shown as examples of what would happen if all of those things were passed and we didn't find other creative ways to potentially handle those. Seth, point well taken, and that's part of, we can't keep having conversations on one-offs, right? Because we're not taking a responsible longer term view. So I agree with you on that front.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I just want to point that out from the big picture standpoint. Like, you look at the 5-year plan, we're sailing over 200 million. So I appreciate that we have all the projects in place so we can make critical decisions.
And that's just, to point out, in case it ever comes up, that 5% is what we're allowed to do without the say of anyone else. That can go up to 10% if you go in front of a special board and get permission. So that number can even be higher.
I don't want that higher.
No. Question?
Just one quick comment on the comment you made, Stephanie, about the EQV potentially growing further. So the EQV is the sum of all the property values that are taxable. And so that's a function of property values. And so with interest rates much higher now than they have been, I'm not sure I would anticipate much more growth there. So I would just be careful about projecting numbers like 400 or, whatever you're throwing around.
I don't want to, and that's why I was trying to answer that question with just saying that the percentage grows up as our equalized value goes up.
But to Rob's point earlier, if we borrowed that much money, our debt service would consume our entire operating budget.
No, not necessarily. So that's the clarification between exempt and non-exempt debt, because when the community votes for exempt debt, they're dedicating the tax dollars to fund that exempt debt. It's the non-exempt within Prop 2.5 that puts real pressure on the rest of the operating budget. So I just want to make sure that everybody's clear on that.
Yeah,
right, thanks.
I want to thank Rob and Stephanie, but I want to make one couple of comments on my point. If we do go ahead and the town approves the $40 million for the fire station, and I know there's at least $5 million in critical roof issues that we're going to have to address in the schools. And if I add another $5 million on for all the other borrowing we've got to do for things like fire trucks and all that kind of stuff, if you just assume within FY26, we will ask the town to approve an override and for exempt debt, but let's assume it's somewhere between $40 and $50 million at an interest rate of 4.5 to 5%. We're probably talking somewhere between $2.5 and $3 million that we're adding on to our debt service on the annualized basis. And we added $3.5 million on for the schools. My sense is, as I said to you in the past, I think the biggest challenges for affluent towns like Westwood are really not going to be in the operating budget. They're going to be on the capital side. And one of the biggest concerns I have, and we've referenced it, the ability of the taxpayers to continue absorbing substantial increases like we did with the Hanlon school, the new Pine Hill School. I think we're starting to run out of that capacity after the fire station. And I don't know the answer. I really don't, but I'm very, very concerned that we're going to find ourselves having a very difficult time funding other major projects, yet the demand is there. Clearly the demand is there. The Sheehan School, our DPW facilities, et cetera. So I think that how we come out of this process and prioritize the list that Rob has on his committee, it may be a prioritized list. I'm not sure how much of that we're going to be able to fund. So I think it's going to be a challenge for the town on both, especially on the capital side. But with that, I really want to thank Stephanie. That is one heck of a presentation you put together. I've had a chance to see it twice, a Monday night and again on Wednesday night. And Rob, I think the work you have started to do on the long-range financial planning is critical. I think it's going to lead to some attempt at prioritizing when your facility studies are finished, both on the school and municipal side. So I think it's a good step that you've taken in that direction. Okay.
Thank you, George. I mean, it's just part of the collective sort of kitchen table conversation we have to have as a community.
Yeah, so thank you both. And Chris Coleman, thank you for your participation tonight. So with that, unless there are any other questions at this point in time, the only comment I have under Chair's update is we will be meeting in person for the December meeting. I think that's extremely important because we will formally be doing a public hearing, which means we're going to have to open a public hearing, go through a formal review, and do a vote, and then close the public. We'll close the public hearing, then to do our vote. And my sense is at that point in time, even though I'm going to ask for it now, I would strongly encourage members of the public, to please attend that meeting. Your views and opinions are extremely important to us. So that I would encourage. With that, Chris, do you have any update you want to make under Vice Chair?
Just to piggyback on what you just said, George, the time here is very, very limited on this special town meeting warrant. So if members of the public have a comment on what they've seen tonight, then don't hesitate. Don't wait until December the 6th to make that comment. Send it in to Victoria. They can get it to the rest of the membership. And I understand, Chris and Rob and Marianne, that you will be voting the final language on your meeting on December the 4th. That gives us very, very little time to look at over before we have to decide on it. So as much information as you can get us on this special town meeting warrant in terms of the draft language that you might be able to share earlier would be very helpful. I'm very concerned about the limited time we have to review information before we'll have to vote on it.
Okay, good comment, Chris. With that, let me think here. Is there any other business that anybody wants to bring up?
George, there are some comments in the question and answers.
Yeah, I was going to get to that right away. Thank you, Jim. Okay. I think under once we do approval of the minutes, then we will open up to public and press, and that's when we'll deal with the questions, if that's okay with everybody. So with that, can I have folks had a chance? And Victoria, once again, I think these are the best minutes of any board that I'm involved with, both public and private. So any comments on the minutes? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Victoria, will you do a quick roll call? We have to do that for approval since we're in Zoom.
Bill Bruce?
I think Bill had to drop off. He sent me a note, okay?
Okay. John Kerry?
Yes.
Jim Ferrero?
Yes.
Seth Frederickson?
Yes.
Mike Gay?
Yes.
George Hertz?
Yes.
Caitlin Jursak?
I abstain. I was not at the last meeting.
George Lahem?
Yes.
George Marone?
George Maroon, are you muted?
Sorry, I said yes. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we just did.
Christina Pedjuix?
Yes.
Chris Peretta?
Yes.
Sean Weller?
Abstain.
And Alex Yell?
Yes.
Okay, those are approved. Chris Pareda, will you read, can you see the questions in there? Will you read them?
Sure.
And hopefully people stated their name and address.
Yeah, from Kathy Wallace, 283 Farm Lane. The firefighters have had zero input into this new building. In order to get the optimal building, the firefighters need to be involved in the working group now. The working group started meeting in December of 2022. I requested minutes for these working group meetings and was told that there are no minutes. We need transparency, accountability, and the best possible building. Will the firefighters be able to join the working group?
The best way I can answer that is, I believe that when we listened to the presentation that Dorn Whittier did at one of the select board meetings, it was, I believe I heard that the firefighters were actively involved with Dorn Whittier. What's happened subsequently, I don't really have any information on. Next question.
From Fran Fusco, 20 Pine Lane. The fire chief never should have put effort into that $400,000 truck in the first place, given that the firefighters advised against it, and they're the ones that use the equipment and know what's best. If a resident hasn't made an issue out of this, we would still be wasting interest on the bond. Needless to say, FinCom did approve this.
All right, well, thank you for your comment. Are there any other questions, Chris?
No, it's the only two I see.
Okay, so we are, there's no press, I assume. So with that, can I get, first of all, I want to thank you all for attending. It's a bit of a longer meeting than I actually thought it would be. Thank you all for your perseverance. Look forward to have a very, very happy Thanksgiving and look forward to seeing everybody at the December meeting. So with that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Second.
Victoria, would you do the roll call, please? Victoria, you muted?
Sorry about that. John Kerry,
Yes.
Jim Ferrero,
Yes.
Steph Frederickson,
Yes.
Mike Gay,
Yes.
George Hertz,
Yes.
Caitlin Jursak,
Yes.
George Lahem,
Yes.
George Marone,
Yes.
Christina Pedjuix,
Yes.
Chris Peretta,
Yes.
Sean Waller,
Yes.
and Alex Yell.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all very much. Have a happy Thanksgiving. See you in December. Okay?
Take care, all.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good
Bye.
night.